Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This film is rated MA15+ for strong action violence. This is Kia's Reviews and this is my review of John Wick Chapter 4. John Wick Chapter 4 is hands down the best of its franchise, delivering some of the best action and intensity that I've ever seen on film. After a small decline in quality with Chapter 3 and a slightly underwhelming delivery on its premise, Chapter 4 delivers exactly what audiences were expecting to happen with the third installment. The way this film is structured is magnificent as it delivers such a gripping story while also continuing the overall plot of the previous installments, inventing new characters that establish and conclude their own story arcs perfectly in these 3 hours. There is a lot of time to include so much content, and there is barely a moment for the story to slow down once the first half hour is over. It constantly keeps you on the edge of your seat with exciting and phenomenal action, the investments you have in all of the new characters, which was wildly surprising yet contributed so much more to this outing than the rest, but also an emotional undertone that all audiences didn't realise was ever there in such an action-focused franchise. This is easily the best action film that I've seen since Mission Impossible Fallout, because John Wick Chapter 4 is beyond brilliant and exceeded my expectations. The structure of John Wick Chapter 4 is what served it the best because it's distinctly split into 3 acts over the course of its 3-hour runtime, an hour for each act. The first act is the only time where I had very minor issues, but none of them were solid enough to take away anything from my final score. The first half hour takes its time in establishing every new character and their motivations, but also reminding audiences of the loose ends from the previous installments that this story needed to conclude properly. In comparison to the following 2.5 hours, this first half hour is slow, but not to the point where you're unengaged with everything that's happening. It's slightly set in a bit of doubt in how the rest of the film would play out, since rewatching Chapter 3 made me realise its drop in quality. However, the next half hour after the setup immediately threw me back into the excitement and adrenaline that gives these John Wick films a beating pulse. Once the movie shifts to arriving in the beautiful location of Osaka, Japan, the tension that is immediately established doesn't let up whatsoever. From this first hour alone, you realise that you're hooked on this journey and it won't stop its fast pace for the rest of the runtime. The use of samurai swords, knives, shuriken, guns, bows and arrows, axes, and more weapons than you can possibly imagine create some of the most enticing battles in film history in John Wick Chapter 4. The way the editing encompasses the consistently gorgeous cinematography and beautifully lit and coloured set designs gave audiences a slight attack on the senses, but in the best way possible because it kept you wanting more, and when you think the fight is over, the film continues its service and doesn't let up for the following 10 minutes. Donnie Yen was the perfect choice to play Caine, as he ended up being my favourite part of John Wick Chapter 4. His experience in martial arts and combat fighting elevates every single fight sequence that he's in, but it's not only his fighting that makes his character so memorable. His morals, motivations, and vulnerabilities are exploited and manipulated constantly throughout this story, and the way he engages and creates a beautiful character arc within 3 hours makes his character so resonant by the conclusion of the film. He didn't need to be introduced in previous films in order to get an audience fully invested in him, in order to connect and sympathise with the trials and tribulations that he has to face in this film. It's a great sign of brilliant writing and insanely well done character work. The second act is where Chapter 4 establishes that it has its best action on display in this outing, and not only is the action solid, but the cinematography and set design really shines in what I think is my favourite action sequence of all time. By making more new characters relevant and integral to the plot in this second act, the story starts to bring John Wick into the forefront more than it did in the first act. The setup was very useful and structurally sound for its first act, but as the story continues, everyone's motivations are questioned, and that brings about some of the most intense and graphic sequences of the entire franchise. The violence in Chapter 4 is easily the most graphic out of all 4 films, and while it may not be as violent as most other action movies, this one certainly relies on bringing about really creative and extended action sequences that actually manages to excite the audience the entire time. There was never an action scene that I wasn't fully enticed by, as my eyes were glued to the screen for the entire 3 hours. Witnessing just how ambitious this film is was beyond ridiculous, but somehow the writers found a way to ground it all and keep its over-the-top premise realistic, which I found to be very impressive. In this second act is a 10-minute fight sequence that comes directly after one of the most intense conversations of the entire movie. The creativity and combat choreography that the John Wick franchise is so well known for is fully brought to the forefront in this particular battle. By encapsulating a multi-platform building, it gave so much to the cinematographer to capture, and with set designs like controlled waterfalls and a club that has multicolored lights, it's easily my favourite action sequence of all time because it brings every aspect of filmmaking together to elevate such an exciting fight. The weapons that John Wick utilizes is beyond beyond wild and beset such an invigorating assurance that this man is not one to mess with. The cinematography with nearly every single colour flashing throughout the entire scene can't help but be admirable to sit back and watch. The editing shifts from quick cuts to extended shots that both give you a riveting and highly intense experience while also being fast-paced to the point where those 10 minutes go by so quickly that it only feels like it's been 30 seconds. It truly is the best representation of perfectly constructed action. The third act is really where the action delivers, but also brings such an epic conclusion to every single character's story arc. An actor who I thought was incredible in his role was Bill Skarsgard as the main, overbearing and malicious antagonist. Even though his accent was a bit tough to understand at times, what he brings to this performance is exactly the type of villain that John Wick needed to rival. The stakes he sets from the first minute he's on screen to the torture that he inflicts on his own hired assassins immediately gives you such a vile and cruel indication that you want this man killed. He creates such a horrific character that really makes the audience hate him, and as he continues to bring about pain and grips his power and manipulation fully, he really accentuates how much of a formidable foe he is. Since the third film's plot was that John Wick was excommunicated and it was basically a free-for-all for any assassin to kill him, it was a bit underwhelming in the fact that there wasn't many people that John ended up fighting in that regard, but this final hour brings back that premise with higher stakes, and in the context of the rest of the film's events, he's faced with his biggest fights yet, and everyone truly is after him in this final gripping hour. If you want non-stop intense action delivered in such a unique way for an extended amount of time, John Wick Chapter 4's final hour is exactly what you want. This is Keanu Reeves at his best and is the reason as to why Chapter 4 is one of the best action films of all time. Once the price on John's head continues to rise and everyone around the world catches wind of it, the final hour encapsulates the most intense action ever captured on film. It doesn't stop until the film concludes. There are cars with broken doors utilised, as well as guns and Kevlar suits, and the excitement that is delivered through this final hour is beyond impressive. The way this movie is choreographed is exceptional, and by realising how important cinematography, camera work and choreography really is in creating a great action movie, John Wick Chapter 4 fully embraces that and delivers one of the most thrilling and exhilarating cinema experiences ever. This isn't your typical action film with a huge Hollywood star like Keanu Reeves who only delivers one-liners. Well, this does do that, but strategically well, and also the one-liners are incredible, but this movie defines how action should be done in Hollywood, and I'm so glad that it delivered more than what I could have possibly expected of it. John Wick Chapter 4 is undeniably the best of its franchise, one of the best films of 2023, my second favourite action film of all time, only trailing behind the first Raid film, as well as containing some of the most gorgeous cinematography that I've ever seen in an action film, while also giving me my personal favourite action sequence of all time. This is a movie that doesn't let up in delivering exactly what audiences want from this franchise, and even though it sets up Chapter 5 really well, Chapter 4 feels like a nice conclusion to the plot that followed through the first 4 films, in the way that it comes back to its roots and embraces what the intentions of the first film were, and enacts those initial intentions by completing them in the progression of this chapter. All of the cast were exceptional, the 3 hours was phenomenal, the action was perfect, and John Wick Chapter 4 has really set the standard for what audiences should expect from action movies nowadays. It's brilliant in every sense of the word, and even though there's a minor pacing issue in its first half hour, I genuinely see myself rewatching this movie a lot, as this is a seamless and exciting experience that never seems to let up once the adrenaline kicks in. Also, make sure you stick around for the post-credits scene. I'll give John Wick Chapter 4 a 10 out of 10. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Letterboxd and Instagram for all of my latest movie reviews. This has been Kia's Reviews, signing off for now.
Don't forget to like, follow, and obey.